Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast. Welcome to episode 26.
So normally I have a very flippant, half-researched note about the number. But as Ben so aptly brought up in the last episode, since this is a bi-weekly podcast, or a semi-monthly podcast, depending on how you look at it, this is now our one-year anniversary for the Bad at Magic podcast of two guys talking to each other and 7 people finding it entertaining.
So this is it's almost, I'd say probably almost exactly the 15th anniversary of us being friends and the 1-year anniversary of us doing a podcast together.
Man, you always do way more research than I do, because I've you've just been in my life for as long as I can remember being an adult.
Yeah, I guess you could say it that way. Well, this being our anniversaries of sorts, we have some stuff I want to talk about related to that, but let's save that till the end of the podcast.
All the mushy stuff will be at the end, people, so bear with us.
So we sometimes use the sub tagline, and I'm not good about using it, but a podcast about games, life, and other things. So today we're going to talk about all of those. We'll talk about games, we'll talk about life, we'll talk about other things. But first, let's talk about other things. Last time you'd asked me if I'd actually watched the musical Hamilton, and I told you I hadn't yet. I intended to. Well, now I have. So I want to talk about it for a minute.
Excellent. And yes, I asked you if you'd watched Hamilton because we briefly touched on it the first time. And what I noticed Hamilton doing to me is that it was like a tiny little nugget in my brain, oh yeah, it was fine. And then it grew and it grew and it kept taking over more and more of my brain space to the point where we are still listening to the soundtrack on a daily basis.
That's that's the epitome of a good musical. You know, that's what a good musical does. It's an earworm. It has ideas that grasp you and hold on to you. And I think that's why it was. How old is this thing? It came out in 2015 or 2016 when it first came on Broadway. I think it was 2016. So it's been around for about 4 years, and it's just kind of grown in the public zeitgeist until it reached, I'm sure it going on streaming on Disney really allowed it to go broad instead of it just being something you have to go to New York and watch on Broadway to see.
Yeah, I mean, there is a subculture of people that are very into musicals and are very aware of what musicals exist. I have no clue about musicals at all. Nicole and I will probably go see a musical in a playhouse. There's a nice playhouse in Phoenix that we like that serves dinner and an intermission with some... it's nice. And we go there probably once a year or so. And she's always the one that picks what we're going to go see because I have no idea. I don't live in this space where I'm aware of oh, did you know that J. Anthony Smith is directing for this understudy or whatever, all the fancy terms that you would use for a musical. I don't know any of that.
Does Nicole follow that kind of stuff?
Not really, but she is very musical, and she came from a very musical family.
Yeah,
and so there are a lot of musicals have been around forever, apparently, and so she's aware of a lot of them. I remember she told me, oh, we're going to go see Fiddler on the Roof. And I'm like, oh, is that the one about the guy on a farm that's on his roof all the time? And she just kind of shook her head sadly, it's fine, you'll like it. And she was right, I did.
All right. What was the last one you went and saw?
The last one we saw, I think it was Fiddler on the Roof.
Okay.
Oh, no, take it back. It was Wicked. We saw Wicked down at the College Theater and stayed overnight down there. That was really nice.
I went and saw that one on the West End in London. It was okay. Yeah, I didn't hate it.
Yeah, we don't have to discuss or critique it here. I'm gonna say entertaining, not the best.
Yeah, agreed. The thing about Hamilton was I did like you did, and I think you said this when you talked about it 2 episodes ago. For about the first 15 minutes, you're like, so are they just gonna sing the whole time? And then you're like, okay, I guess they are.
Well, what was blowing my mind is I was prepared for a musical to sing lines. That's a thing. I was not prepared for a musical to rap lines. That was throwing me.
Yeah, I dug that. I liked the flavor that added to take something modern and then transpose it onto the past in a way that gives insight and understanding into what happened back then.
And I saw an interview with the guy who plays Hamilton in that is the guy who
Lin-Manuel Miranda.
There you go. He's the creator and the brain behind this whole thing. And he gave a quick introduction to it when he performed the opening number at the White House for the Obama administration. And he said Like, I am going to sing a song about a person that I think really embodies hip-hop, where they caught beef with all of their peers and used their words and superior wit to solve these problems. And that was Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton. And, everybody laughs because Secretary of Treasury is a hip-hop thing. Like, yeah.
Yeah, the $10 bill guy's going to rap. Okay.
And it works.
Yeah, it does. So, it's got that history, but with a twist. And I really dug it. And it reminded me, so one of the last times I went to the theater in the States was when I got back from Afghanistan in 2011. I planned this elaborate date with my wife, and I wanted to do a lot of stuff I thought she would enjoy together. We left the kids with some family and went up to Denver and got a hotel and went to the theater, went to a Rockies game, a bunch of cool stuff. Anyway, the play we went and saw then was Les Miserables, which is based on the French Revolution, which is also kind of a historical thing, musical, and it also has the same characteristic in that they sing the entire time. Like there's no spoken dialogue; it's all sung. But like you said, the kind of changing between genres breaks it up a bit, where you've got rap and a little bit of hip hop and some very traditional like Broadway kind of musical, like the transition number that the King of England sings.
Yes, which I thought was an interesting concept, where all of the proper British songs, like from the other perspective, are all very straightforward, like normal musical lyrics like you would expect from a musical. And then all of the new agey, like American, like this is America, that was all hardcore hip hop. It made an interesting juxtaposition there.
One of the things I like about historical depictions is when it's something I'm familiar with, but it makes me go, wait a minute, did that really happen? So while I'm watching it with my son and he's like, Dad, why are you getting on your phone? I'm like, I'm looking this stuff up. So I didn't know there was a lot of stuff that made me look up. Like, okay, the whole sex scandal thing that went down, like that was legit. That really happened. That was like the first full-on sex scandal in American history politics.
Yes, and handled in a way that is just absolutely unheard of in today's day and age. Where in the age of deny, counter accuse, he came out before it was public knowledge and printed a paper. It's like, hey, just to be clear with everybody, I had a huge sex scandal. If you haven't heard about it, here's all the illicit details.
Yeah, he kept like descriptive notes and history, and kept a pay stubs for all the bribes he paid, and
which is unfathomable now. But I mean, yeah. That's the kind of guy. Like, to be completely honest, that's the kind of person you want as the Secretary of Treasury. The guy that's keeping the receipts for the adulterous affair that he's having.
That's right. Yeah. So I enjoyed it. It was interesting. I mean, there was a lot there to digest. I mean, it was very much a traditional stage production, and there was all kind of. It wasn't really dynamic as far as the actual movement and usage of the stage. It was mostly just right there in your face with the actors and characters doing all the storytelling, and they were good characters, and it was well acted, and it told me some stuff I knew and some stuff I didn't know, and engaged me. And kind of like you, after I got done, I wasn't like, I want to watch that again, but it hasn't gone out of my mind either.
Yeah, so just wait. Next podcast, we'll be talking about how many times you've played, Wait For It on your Google playlist.
Yeah, okay, so that's one thing about it. The fact that they kind of sing the whole time without start or stop, it also feels like the song never... It doesn't feel like they're individual songs. It's just they're singing the whole time, so...
Well, from experience, because we finally broke down and stopped watching on YouTube, we bought the soundtrack and just downloaded it on our devices. The soundtrack from start to finish, there are no breaks. Like, there are discrete songs on the playlist, but if you listen to the whole thing, it is every line of the play from start to finish.
Right. Yeah,
now,
like that.
I had two big takeaways from this, from Hamilton, that I want to share with you now since you've seen it. The first one is that I have found, and it constantly reminding me of this same lesson I have to relearn throughout my entire life, is that history is way more important and way more interesting than anyone gives it credit for. Like, you come out of high school and college thinking history is this dry, dull subject because you just had to memorize dates and names and places that don't make any sense. But then you actually start to learn a little bit of the plot line, and it is very interesting to see how it all evolves and changed and affects the modern world. The second thing is, I really want Revolutionary era jackets to come back as a fashion. I really want one of those long, like 18 button jackets with the giant cuffs and all that. That looks sharp.
All right. This is the Fleshman Family Halloween challenge this year. You guys can all look like Revolutionary Hamilton family. I don't know if the kids would get as into that as they did. We're like, all right, son, you get a sword as big as your sister.
So we're going to have to discuss at some point what the Fleshman Family Halloween looks like in a COVID-19 era. But I do still want to do costumes, but I don't know if I can. Nicole is a heck of a seamstress, but I don't know if she's up to that challenge quite yet.
All right, well, let's change to a different subject entirely because we'll definitely come back to Halloween costumes. You also last time had suggested that I watch Palm Springs, and knowing that my favorite film is Groundhog Day, and this was kind of like a take on the Groundhog Day concept, I have a lot to say about Palm Springs.
Oh, a lot, huh? It's a good movie.
Well, the first thing I want to ask is just a kind of a philosophical question. What's so fascinating about the Groundhog Day concept? Why does that appeal to people? Why does that suck people in? It sounds like it could be kind of dull. Like, all right, we're going to make a movie and we're going to show them something and then we're going to show it again. And then we're going to show it again and then we're going to show it again.
I will tell you why, Ben. I have this answer. It is interesting to people in the same way that people replay arguments and conversations in their head over and over again in the shower, days or months or weeks after the fact, after it has happened. We all want a second chance at some of these one-shot opportunities.
And interesting how just some random mundane day in our lives can have those kinds of opportunities in it.
Well, yeah. And there are so many. And most of the time you don't even notice these discrete decision points as they're happening. And that's the thing. That's the appeal. Is like, man, if I could do today over, like knowing what the consequences of my initial decisions were going to be, like I could really just optimize or tweak or change what happened that day.
Yeah, another movie that kind of tooled around with this idea that to not great effect, it wasn't very successful, I'd say, was called The Butterfly Effect with Ashton Kutcher, where he was trying to prevent a girl from dying in his past and he could like go back and do things over. But that was more about how he would try to change one thing and then that would make other things change and it would have unintended consequences.
Right.
But this concept where he's just doing one day over and over and over, it allows for them to kind of overcome all of the randomness and just really know with a great degree of certainty what's going to happen because they've just done it so many times.
What really sucked me into the beginning of that movie was like you got this inkling. The first like 20 minutes of the film where you don't know really what's going on and Andy Samberg is just going through and some of the things that he says and some of the actions that he's taking, like you're just kind of like, wait a minute, are we already in the loop here? Because he has done it already.
Yeah, but you also can't tell if he's just like a carefree kind of guy that just doesn't really take anything serious or if he's in the loop. Now, in my research on Groundhog Day, that was actually one of the ways they tooled around with initially writing the screenplay for Groundhog Day was instead of starting at the beginning and living it through with our protagonist Bill Murray, Phil Connors, they wanted to come in the middle of it where you meet this guy and he knows everything that's going to happen and you're curious and wondering why does this guy know everything that's going to happen. So they decided to do that, which was kind of the same as Groundhog Day, but they introduced one new concept that I think wasn't in Groundhog Day at all that was very interesting. And that was the idea that and because of this, they had to explain what caused it. Like in Groundhog Day, you never know what caused it. But in Palm Springs, they're like, all right, it's this loophole in space-time that happened because of the gravitational field of the Earth or whatever. She figures it all out. But the reason that's important is because more than one person gets caught in it.
Yes, there's a physical location that's how the characters, he got caught in it in the first place as he fell into that random time-space portal or whatever. And then through his what has to have been millions of iterations, he accidentally sucked in first one other person and then another person, both on kind of accident.
Right. So, and that made for a lot of new narrative space that was interesting to explore. What if there was another person that was caught in it too? Or a third person?
Oh, Ron. Ron was my favorite character in that movie.
So, first things first, get this out of the way. Tell Nicole, thank you for making me watch this.
She made me watch it, and by proxy, I made you watch it. Yeah,
you got it. You nailed it. Second, Andy Samberg is a great sympathetic actor. Like, you see these comedic actors that become famous for comedy, like Adam Sandler, Jim Carrey, Will Ferrell. All three of them started off and were so wholly wrapped up as a funny person that you didn't think that guy could ever do something serious, and they always can. You know, Adam Sandler, I think of Punch Drunk Love, or Jim Carrey, The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, or Will Ferrell in Stranger Than Fiction, one of my favorite movies. All three of those are great serious movies where, you know, the leading man really carries the role, and I thought Andy Samberg did really well here.
Yeah, I think so too.
Now, once we get through once, like you said, about 15 minutes in, where it becomes apparent that our protagonist is caught in this space-time loop, now I had a problem that you probably didn't have. And I got maybe like halfway through it, I'm like, these people suck. Like, all of them. I hated everyone. Like, they were all just jerks and mean and selfish, and no one there was, like, remotely relatable for me.
I mean, I don't know. I kind of related to Andy Samberg in the idea of when he explains himself, like why he is this nihilistic, uncaring person, because he's been stuck in this loop for so long. He's gone through all of the stages of loss and has just landed on acceptance and just like, you know what, whatever. Like, I'm going to do whatever I feel like every day. And like, why do you keep going to the wedding? Because it's got free food. Everybody's there. I know them. It's easy.
Yeah, I kind of like that. Now, and that's interesting in that it reveals what feels like it should have been the final form for his character. Like, he's just a carefree guy. His default mode is wearing a Hawaiian shirt and shorts, floating in the pool, drinking on a pizza slice, eating a beer, whatever. You get it.
Yeah.
But once a second person gets caught in the loop, you realize maybe he's not done yet. Maybe he hadn't reached.
Yeah, she brought him back. Like, just that's kind of a previous incarnation of the guy. Like, he thought he was hopelessly lost in this ridiculous scenario forever and just gave up on it, really. And then this extra person comes in that allows him to actually express change and grow. Like, there is no growth of a person if nothing around them ever changes. Like, you can't grow as a person if your actions don't lead to consequences. Like, there's
and by definition, around him, nothing ever changed.
Exactly. So he could do whatever he wanted. And that's, to tangent for a second, that's one of my favorite little contrites that they did in this movie, is that they would show one scenario that was, like, outlandish and then jump cut to, like, 5 seconds before, and you this is the next day and he's just going through the same thing, only made different choices. Like at the wedding, when he, like, called him out on this horrible thing and they got in a fist fight and he stabbed him in the face with a fork. There's a guy with a fork in his cheek screaming, "There's a fork in my face!" And then they jump cut to, like, exactly the same scene with, like, everybody's all just doing what they normally do. Like, I really like that as a joke.
Huh.
But by introducing this extra character and this extra person into this unchanging scenario, it allowed for the character development and growth that we saw. And like you said, I don't think the final form, he was in a form, what he thought was his final form. And then there was another person that came and made him realize that there was more to this life that he had given up or forgotten.
Yeah. Now, they picked some great actors for all of these roles because they're all very memorable in their own ways. You know, there's the bride and groom and all of their family and the other guests and his girlfriend that doesn't really love him and you know, the bride's sister and random guests at the wedding and all. There's no throwaways here. They're all just really interesting. And while this may have been, you know, like a streaming service pet project and it didn't have a big budget for special effects or anything like that, they did well at picking out talent.
Yeah, I think so. And that's where it was needed too, because this movie is all about the characters.
Now, there was one point where I think I don't know if this is just Andy Samberg's influence, but they seem to want to have us laugh at them doing drugs. And it reminded me of other movies where I sit there completely unmoved, not amused, wondering why everyone thinks it's so funny to watch people get high.
Well, and I understand what you're saying there, but the kind of the punchline to that whole thing was, like, they were partying hard, and that ended up being the biggest problem in his existence.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's a good lesson point in that. Like, oh, we did some drugs one time and it was fun, and now for the rest of my internal existence in this
There's this
loop,
person trying to kill me. Yeah.
there's this psychopath that randomly shows up and murders me every once in a while.
Or even tortures him.
Yeah, nothing worse than dying slowly in the ICU.
Yeah. Yeah, they repeated that line several times. Now, one of the main themes here was being alone. And it's funny how he could be in this place where he's surrounded by people that are supposedly coming together to celebrate this, to symbolically to hold a wedding, which is a celebration of the unity of two people, and yet he was so alone.
Yeah, because of the unchanging nature of it. And like it was funny because they're pairing that then with the togetherness that they kept saying, like, because like then the girl starts asking him like, who have you hooked up with? Because let's face it, that's territory that Groundhog Day did not tread on.
It kind of did. You know, Phil, he goes into the cafe and he meets he meets the girl that squeaks like a squirrel when she gets real happy. You know, they were just keeping it more PG than this one.
I got you, but I appreciated the full conversation of okay, you've been trapped in here for, you know, what is like 1,000,000 years. Like, who haven't you been with?
Yeah, and they mind some comedy there that he you know, the door had swung both ways just because.
Oh, that was my favorite joke. Is he's like, who else? Oh, your dad. And then they jump cut to a scene where they're sitting on the bed together, and it's like that's from a movie. It's from some movie because I've seen that exact scene too many times. Where the one guy's looking at the other guy and goes, "What are we doing?" And then it cuts back to the two, and he's like, "No, I'm just kidding." But that's really funny.
But they kind of leave it up to us to wonder if he really tried that or not.
I'm sure he did.
So there's the theme of being alone, and he really is kind of alone at the beginning, but he's at peace with it. You know, he's not like angry about it. He's not depressed. He's past all of that. He's just at peace with being alone. But then once might not be the reality he has to adjust to anymore, then he has to look at forgiveness. You know, he has to forgive himself. He has to forgive his girlfriend. He has to forgive others. And then there's the secret hidden secret of the whole movie.
You blow it. Just do it. Spoilers, right, people.
So the sister of the bride slept with the groom the night before the wedding.
Oh, I gasped audibly and like leapt out of my seat when we discovered that secret. Like I was so into it at that point.
Yeah, and they hold on for a long time, and it's really a payoff. And then she disappears, and there's an interesting nuance of the film in that every morning when they wake up again following the reset of the time loop, she woke up before he did. So if she doesn't want to see him, she can be gone before he wakes up, and he can't find her.
Yeah, and it took him what has to have been years because she got like a double doctorate in quantum physics in the time that she was gone. So it had to be
Groundhog Day too. You know, he goes and learns piano and ice carving, and the other guy's just like, you know, who can I get laid with?
That's the only thing that I like. This movie just abstracts that away. But like I kept pausing it. Like, do you have any idea at the amount of time that had to elapse between this montage? Like, that's ridiculous. In order to speak in an educated fashion about quantum physics that you learned from YouTube videos, like seriously, decades at least, right?
Yeah. So, which is fantastic. There's some great videos on YouTube about how much time actually passed during the movie Groundhog Day, but it's, you know, somewhere in several thousands of days.
Yeah, no, this is definitely in orders of magnitude longer for these two idiots.
Yeah, I mean, how much time do you need to learn how to toss a card into a hat on the bed versus how much time do you need to learn quantum physics?
And then that brings me back to my favorite character, Ron. Because we only see Ron a handful of times. And so think about Ron, this whole thing from Ron's perspective. He wakes up every day in his bed at home in Irvine, California, and has like this just normal kind of suburban day. Or where he's supposed to go to this wedding, apparently. Or sometimes he blows it off to be with his family. Or sometimes he wakes up and he's in the shower. He's like, you know what? I think I'm going to go murder Andy Samberg today.
They don't even say if he was a friend of the groom or a friend of the bride. You know, he's just a guest at the wedding. Yeah.
Well, because weddings have guests like that. Like, I can point to my wedding picture, and there's all right, so here's all the people everybody in this picture is people we invited, and here's the set of people we actually wanted to show up, and here's the people that we didn't want to show up, we just wanted gifts from that did show up.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting how Sarah's character, she does like the full self-improvement thing. Once she has to actually grapple with her sin, that's the big secret of the movie. He didn't really have one, but she did. And once she actually has to look herself in the face and to take a look at where she's at in her life, she goes full self-improvement track. And
yeah, if we're going to talk about
around.
Yeah, if we're going to talk about these characters as protagonist, antagonist, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind Andy Samberg is the antagonist in this movie, and our girl Sarah is the protagonist. She's the one that actually works towards a desirable end. And then when she proposes this theory, like, hey, this scenario that you admit is mediocre on the best of days, that you've been locked into for 1,000,000 years, what has to be, I have a way out of it. And he immediately balks, like, whoa. Like, are you kidding me? Like, you have to have lived just through sheer mathematical possibility, like every possible iteration of this day, hands down, no doubt about it. And you're worried about it. What are you losing? Like, you've lost literally nothing.
So this is where you can abstract it and make sense of our normal lives. Do we ever get in a place where we're so comfortable in our routine that we just don't want to try something new because what we're in is predictable and comfortable and we don't want to be uncomfortable?
Ben, you just, that's a whole aisle at the bookstore, to use a phrase that you used earlier today, of risk assessment, risk aversion versus, people that are out there, the daring do's, and the people that just, no, I just want to sit in my comfortable box. And we wax and wane and we change our opinions. And I get all that. And I am becoming more and more risk averse as I get older and my children are more developed and they're taking on all the risk and I'm the one that's trying to pull them back. But in this scenario, there is no doubt in my mind. If I have lived the perfect day with my family for 1,000,000 years, I think I'm ready for a change.
Yeah. Have you shampooed with Orchid Explosion by Fournier yet?
That is the least interesting plot device that I found in this whole movie.
I don't think it's a real thing. Maybe
how
it is.
At the beginning of the movie, this is the creepy thing. In the first iteration that we're seeing, in the first 15 minutes of the movie, he knows that scent perfectly. That should have clued Sarah in immediately, right then. How do you know what kind of shampoo that I use? By smell. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So as far as this movie, I think it was a good exploration of how this simple plot device of what if our protagonist is on a loop really brings out the humanity in people. It brings out things like the idea of being alone or forgiveness or whether or not you're comfortable with your things the way they are, or you're willing to change, or whether or not dinosaurs exist, or those kinds of things.
You see, Ben, you watched that and got a lot of really deep and interpersonal connection and thoughts and really provocative stuff out of this movie. I just thought it was freaking hilarious when J. Jonah Jameson shot Andy Samberg in the chest at point blank range with a bow and arrow while he was standing in his trash can.
There's something for everybody. All right.
Hey, would you mind offing me so I can beat the traffic?
Okay, one more time once more for old time's sake. I thought that was funny because I didn't think he was going to agree to it. I thought they were showing that his character, Roy's character, had matured to the point where he wouldn't want to do that anymore. He's like, no, okay.
Okay, hang on a second. At that point, Roy, is it Roy? I kept calling him Ron. Yeah, at that point, Roy's character had been a serial murderer for a very long time. So it's it's one more. What's the difference?
So it's funny how, because we had three characters, you could start to see what the possibilities were. Sarah's character, she went physicist. Ron's character just went lush, and Roy's character went serial murderer. Are those him? If today was Groundhog Day, are any of those a possibility for me? Could I go lush? Could I go serial killer?
Now, I could totally go serial killer, because that sounds just imagine having a hobby where you're living your normal suburban life and for the last couple of months I've been planning this super elaborate murder of a guy in Nevada that no one's ever going to hear about, and I'm going to just get a free pass on it the next day. That sounds, honestly, look me in the eye and tell me that doesn't sound like a fun hobby. Like, how could I kill Andy Samberg this time so he doesn't see it coming?
Well, speaking of the desert Nevada, so I just got back to Illinois from my trip out west. I went to Idaho. I went to Utah. I swam in the Great Salt Lake for the first time ever, which was cool. And it was very much a similar kind of geography to what we saw in that movie. But while I was out there, my brother-in-law, who I'm a huge fan of, did what he does. He's one of those kind of people that is always interested in others. But he loves playing games. But he's not the kind of guy like you that will come in a room like, everyone stop what you're doing. We're gonna play this game right now. You're gonna love it. No, he uses like the completely opposite approach, where he's like, he'll come out and he'll set up the game on the table and just hope that other people will come and join in, and they do, and then we play the game. So it's like the whole other end of the spectrum from you. Both of you guys love games, but his approach is completely different.
His approach is completely different because of the people he's surrounded with. If I set up a board game and just sat with my fingers drumming together in another room, I'd be sitting in that room by myself alone for a month. Like, we have vastly different types of people we surround ourselves with.
Anyway, so I got to my mom's house, which is always immaculate because that's just how she lives, and there was next to the piano a stack of board games about a foot high, foot and a half, and it was out of place because everything's always in place at my mom's house. So I kind of looked at it. I was like, I haven't seen some of these before. So while I'm there, all my siblings start to come around, and the house fills up with people, and we've had dinner, and they haven't left yet. So I just go over to the stack of games and get one, and then the group magically forms, and we all sit down at the table and play, and then everyone goes away, and it was fun. And I'm like, huh. And I said something to my sister about it, and she's like, yeah, Kyle plans this out carefully. He looks at his entire collection of games before you guys come, thinks of which ones you're gonna like, gathered all the games that he thought he curated this for us.
Yes, this is exactly right. He went to the wine cellar full of every esoteric game in like a smoking jacket and a fez, and walked around rubbing his chin like,
What are they gonna like? Let's see. Their youngest is 10 now, and yeah, exactly. Two have left the house. So my brother-in-law has done this, and he's fantastic. He's a great gamer. He always beats me, but I never feel bad about it because he's so unassuming, and he's patient and teaching you the rules, and just a great experience. So I said all that so I could say, just like when we went there in December and I tried a bunch of new games, this time I went and I tried a bunch of new games. So since this is the Bad at Magic podcast and we talk about games, life, and other things, I want to talk about a couple new games I tried.
Yes,
so
please.
Right on top of the stack was a game called Point Salad, and it was bright and colorful and brash. I'll put a link to it and some photos in the show notes. But it looked really easy. So I took it and set it down on the table. Our group formed, and it was fantastic. It's really cool. Basically, it's a deck of cards, about as many as like an Uno deck of cards. Imagine that. But it has the game on both sides of the cards. And on one side of the card are 6 types of salad. There's lettuce, tomato, onion, pepper, carrot, and I don't know, something else I'm not thinking of right now, celery or something like that. So six kinds of salad. And then on the other side, there's just various combinations of things that make your collection of salad worth points. Like if you have 3 onions, you get a point. Or if you have an onion and a carrot, you get a point. Or if you have one of each, you get 4 points, or something like that.
Okay.
So then you just lay out the cards in front of you in stacks with, like 6 revealed in 3 stacks. And then every turn you can either take a point card, which is the back side of the card, or you can take 2 salad cards, which is the front side of the card.
Okay.
And so then you can just have a group. It could be 2 people, it could be 6 people, and you're just collecting cards. And then at the end, you total up your points, and whoever has the most points wins. and the thing about this game that's really interesting is, one, it's so easy to understand. Like, you can sit down without anyone hardly even explaining it and understand it in just a moment, which is great. But also, it has a lot of interaction where, like, you can see what other people are doing and cut them off, or sometimes it also has mechanisms for kind of adjusting your strategy in the middle of the game, and all these add up to just being a really great game for like a group of people. I loved it. I highly recommend Point Salad.
That sounds really interesting, and that's one of the key points that I have when you're introducing new people to a game is turn length. If you have short attention span people, you need very short turn lengths.
Yeah, and this was definitely short turn length. Even my mom would play it with this, and that's saying something. So, yeah.
Cool.
Now, another one I tried that my mom was sour on because they talked her into trying it once, so she had a terrible experience with it, but I want to recommend anyway. It's called Azul. Have you played Azul before?
I have not played Azul before.
Okay, Azul was in a big box, and I opened it up, and it was full of... have you ever played with like a high-end set of dominoes where the dominoes are made out of like real quality plastic and they're glossy and stuff like that?
I would call high-quality dominoes made of something like gold or ivory, but high-quality plastic substitutes well. I have, and those they just feel good. They're heavy in the hand. Yeah.
Yeah, like that. So this has a big bag full of those, except they're in 6 colors. And everything is in hexagons. They give you a board that you have to cover with these tiles in hexagons, and they're but the tiles are actually shaped like I'm going to pluralize this wrong. Rhombuses.
The pool of rhombus. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then what you do is you pull random tiles out, and there's a pattern you have for putting them into a pool where you can select from them, and then you have to try to cover your board in these colorful tiles in the best way that garners you the most points, so that when the supply of tiles is exhausted, you have more points than the other players. A little bit more complicated to understand, but also pretty low bar of entry, low turn length, and very satisfying. Also highly recommended.
Games like that are interesting, that have low barriers to entry, but then a lot of depth to them. Like if there's like in-depth strategies, or there's always something more you can learn, or some new trick that you can pick up, those are good. Plus the combination of that with regular geometry, that's going to tickle a lot of people's brains. Like I'm very OCD, so having multiple rhombus fit into perfect little regular hexagon shapes, that's just going to make me happy.
Yeah.
And to put a pin in this whole thing, I have to say, I've felt bad since I've said it like 30 seconds ago. I do not agree with ivory being made into dominoes. Let's get that out there. People don't flame me on the internet like I'm against the ivory trade. So let's move past that.
Well, speaking of unethical practices, we also played the game Puerto Rico, which I'm assuming you've played.
Ben, you're assuming too much, because I have not played Puerto Rico either.
Okay, so Puerto Rico's kind of a classic one of those games that I think you and I talked about when we did a big board game review, where it's like not the mainstream, but it's well known among players who are fans of games.
Okay.
It's a resource and trading game. You know, there's no combat or anything like that. Probably similar to Scythe, the part of Scythe that isn't combat.
Okay.
Where you're just on the island of Puerto Rico, and you own some land and some space in the city, and you're trying to develop your merchantness and overcome everyone else by being the greatest trader. So you can trade in indigo and corn and coffee and tobacco and sugar and something else I'm forgetting, but basically you want to accumulate resources and load them on the ships. And this game is really complex. Like, it's one of those games that takes 10 minutes to set up. There's lots of little tiles and lots of little pieces, and it's completely the opposite of point salad. You just sit down and everyone knows what they're doing in 10 seconds. No, it takes 10 minutes to set up, and it's really complicated. But if you like those kinds of games where it's kind of complicated, it's not really complicated. You can get it pretty fast. There's 5 or 6 different strategies you can pursue to win. You can interact with the other players, and it's a good time. I recommend it if you haven't played it.
Good. No, and so about myself, I don't have any limits as far as how complicated something has to be before I lose interest. Like if it's, that looks too complicated for me, I will never say that. Like the more complicated it is, I just see it more as a challenge. Like, this is super complicated, which means it's going to take a lot of effort for me to be good at it. And spoiler alert, Ben, I'm terrible at every game I've ever played. So, I don't know. Maybe I've just super overestimated my own capabilities, but I always have fun anyway.
Well, a year ago, I was away from home, and you're like, hey, man, what are you doing in a couple of weeks? We're going to Dallas, and we're going to get together with some friends, and we're just going to play board games all weekend. I'm like, you know what? I got nothing going on. Airfare to Dallas is pretty good right now. Let's go. And that was kind of what kicked off this podcast. But I remember when we got there, and there was piles of obscure, off of what's that website where people
Board Game Geek
get the one where they invent a concept of a board game and they get people to pay them to build it.
Kickstarter.
Yeah, there was Kickstarter versions of games and obscure games I never heard of. And you might look at that and go, all right, a challenge. But man, there was a point that weekend where they pulled out the 6th in a row game that had a manual this thick and a million pieces, and my brain was just going into hibernation.
Yeah, those weekend benders and board games are amazing. I can't wait till COVID to be over and I can get back over to that. Shout out to all my SMD peeps in Texas. Woo!
Yeah, I invited them to listen to the podcast. Maybe somebody's listening in.
I'm sure they're not. They shouldn't.
Put aside Azul, Point Salad, and Puerto Rico, and the other game I spent some time on while I was out there is I dug out my old Nintendo 64 that I keep at my brother's house, and I played my favorite puzzle games, Dr. Mario and the new Tetris. Only the version on Nintendo 64. Have you played that one?
New Tetris? No. Dr. Mario, yes.
Okay. Well, the new Tetris that came out for Nintendo 64 had this interesting wrinkle to it where completing a line all the way across was worth 1 point. But if before you completed a line all the way across, you took 4 pieces and made them into a 4x4 block, then when you would complete a line including that block, it was worth like 10 points. So it becomes all about making these blocks. And if you make a homogeneous block where all 4 of the pieces are the same ones, and you can only do that with the lines, the squares, and the L's, then it becomes a gold block, it's worth 10 points. And then if you do it with combinations of the others, it becomes a silver block. Anyway, it's a really fun sub game that it introduces into Tetris. Maybe I'll put a link to a video of it in case you've never seen it, but it's my favorite version of Tetris ever. It's fantastic.
Now, were you playing the side-by-side version so at least one other person could play with you, or did you just put headphones on, ignore everybody on your family vacation, and just play Dr. Mario for an hour?
Both.
Excellent. That is the right answer on a family vacation.
So this becomes a big social thing because a lot of my other family members like this. So there'll be a time when someone's just sitting there playing by themselves, and then everyone's like, "Give me a controller." And because it's the N64, you got 4 people all jostling each other. With Dr. Mario, you're piling garbage on each other and talking smack, and with Tetris, you're just like head down, like trying to do lines as fast as you can. But any way you look at it, good time. Those are my recommended games from my summer vacation: Azul, Point Salad, Puerto Rico, Dr. Mario, and the new Tetris on Nintendo 64.
When people like you tell stories like this, I can't help but be a little jealous. And the reason is, in my family, and I love my family, they're the best, but I am a little bit of a black sheep. If I go to a big family gathering, not one other person in the entire county is going to say, "Hey, let's bust out a board game and play." I'm the guy that's got to be driving that truck, right? And so then I go to these gatherings or the benders that I have in Texas, or if some other person's house and there's other nerds there, and then we can talk or even play board games just organically. That's just so amazing, and I get so jealous. The same way that oh man, being an only child must be awesome. No, being an only child sucks. You have siblings. It must be amazing. Just the grass is always greener type of effect.
My siblings love to play games.
Yeah,
and my brother-in-law too. So
appreciate them,
great.
Ben. Appreciate them and their weird games that they curate for you.
Hey, any of my siblings that are listening to this podcast, thank you for playing games with me. I love it. Now, I have to. I consider not going down this line, but I'm going to. It probably helps that no one in my family drinks alcohol.
So, what? What? Dude, alcohol play games and board games. No, come on. No. I'm going to make a hard, those two go together. That's chocolate and graham crackers.
But I'm saying, if your family's all sitting around, somebody cracks open a beer and they're just sitting around talking, and that's entertainment enough. But, we're we play board games to entertain ourselves.
Man, so I don't know where to go with this. Because there's so many jokes. I can't pick out just one. I think I've got to settle with, okay, so what you're saying is that Mormon culture is just so boring that board games are that much more appealing? Is that what it is?
Ooh, good one.
Okay.
Well, speaking of games that bring people together, when you and I first met, you were playing Magic the Gathering, and you introduced me to it, and that led to us being friends and this podcast. And this week I was looking at an article by Jim Davis, one of my favorite Magic players, former pro or current pro, but big streamer and YouTuber with Magic. But he'd written an article on his website. He's currently sponsored. I'll put a link to the article where he asked what your signature spellbook is. And he picked the number 8, but it could be any number. Basically, anyone that's played Magic for any amount of time, there's tens of thousands of Magic cards in the catalog. Which are the ones that you identify with and why?
And this kind of comes from the idea that the manufacturer of the game produces things called signature spellbooks. Like they have characters that exist in the story of the game, and then they release a separate product that said, "Oh, this is Chandra's spellbook or Jace's spellbook," and it's like all spells that are very much like flavor-wise associated with that character.
Yeah. So this would be, what are the spells that are flavor-wise associated with Josh or Ben?
Interesting. And now, what was your thought process when we first, like, you sent me that article and I read it, and like, that is interesting. And what actually really grabbed my attention was that there was a picture of somebody had taken like their signature spellbook cards, gotten a copy of each of them, and made this really like nice looking frame. I say
a shadow box.
Yeah, almost, with the cards like all side by side and matte framed out. Like, it was really pretty. And I immediately told myself, this is something that I am going to make.
Nice.
So I will make one of these. And then I started thinking, well, what would I put into that?
Yes.
And so the thought process, like, I immediately had to create criteria for myself. If I'm going to pick 8 cards out of all the cards that I've experienced in my gaming career, how am I going to define them? And I will
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. Well, my first criteria, and this was the biggest one that I kept coming back to, was I had to know the name of the card and what it looked like without having to look it up. Like, I can't go to a search engine and be like, oh, the card from this set that does this. No, I had to know it instantly off the top of my head.
That's a good criteria. I like that one.
Yeah.
One you can think of off the top of your head.
Yes. That was really kind of it. Everything else was I just mulled around a lot of cards, and that was the one that defined, like, if it made the chop or not.
So we talked on a past episode about what Mark Rosewater calls the player psychographics. Basically, how they try to create a game that appeals to the entirety of their audience because it has different aspects to it, whether it's something interesting and powerful, whether it's something complicated and brings out your creative side, whether it's something that allows you to be competitive and play the game well, or whether it's something that's beautiful and interesting and has a story behind it. And all these things are aspects to it. And I realized anyone's signature spellbook could be related to any of those things. Like, I want this in my signature spellbook because I like the art on it, or because it has a great story, or because I won a tournament with it, or, you know, all those things. So, and for me, I kind of like you, I just started forming rules in my head, but I guess I'd made the one, like you said, of just being able to think of it off the top of my head. But for me, it was like, what are the cards that I identify with because of those player psychographics?
That's interesting. Like, I some of my cards aren't necessarily like good cards in the game of Magic, but I like them just for stories that I have that exist around the card outside of the game. And so that's it. Why don't we stop beating around the bush and actually dig into this, huh? You want to go through the signature spellbook cards?
Yeah. So you and I have each made a list of 8 cards. We'll take turns and tell why they're on our signature spellbook. So you go first.
Oh, I get to go. Okay. So I'm going to start with my all-time favorite card. And like when this card was printed and I started using it, and it's the best card. And that's it. It's me sitting at the table. This is the best card, changed my mind. And that card is Time Stop. It's 4 colorless, and 2 blue. And it has 3 words on it. Some of the 3 most powerful words in Magic.
You picked a 6 mana instant?
I picked a 6 mana instant, and I will tell you why. Those 3 words are end the turn. And then the rest of the card is full of all of the rules implication reminder text that entails. And the best part about it, and this is the thing that everybody underrates so hard, is every spell that is currently trying to make it onto the battlefield is all just gone forever. And I have, like, every blue deck that I ever played, that was a one of in every single one of them. Like, it could have been a blue aggro deck. I had 1 copy of Time Stop because it came in so dang handy every time. I remember wrecking your face so hard with Time Stop that I still, like, a decade later, I still think and giggle about it because I can describe to you the setup perfectly. You were playing Jhoira the Ghitu deck. You had a Greater Gargadon suspended. You had this turn where, like, I knew it was going to play out this way. I had counter magic, and you were, like, countering my counter magic, and I knew, you're like, all right, he's going to tick this down, he's going to get this on the stack, and then he's going to do this. And I had this whole elaborate thing played out, and we had like 10 cards that were going to hit the board and just destroy the entire board state. And I threw down Time Stop, and the game was over. There was no way you were coming back from that.
Right, and that's definitely one of those experiences. I'm like, I pick it up and I read it and I look at it and I look at the board and I'm like, wait a minute, is what I think is about to happen? Is that what's happening right now?
Wait, did I just sacrifice all of my resources to get a 9/7 with haste so I could kill my opponent this second, and then he just eliminated all of it? Yeah.
Yeah, and now I have no card. Yeah, no, I think that was... I know why you remember that one so much, because I believe I sacrificed all my land in order to bring my guy out, and I think you won what's called flawless victory, that game.
It was beautiful. It was one of those like samurai moments where you decapitate somebody and there's not a drop of blood on you. It was just great.
Okay, so you are now reaching into territory of one of the player psychographics I didn't talk about. There's Johnny Combo Player, Timmy Power Gamer, Spike, who likes to win, Vorthos, who likes beautiful cards, and Dave, who wants to piss off his opponent.
I will not deny that I am first and foremost a Johnny Combo player, but there is a Dave that lurks deep inside me, Ben, and I have cards on this list that talk about that.
All right, so the first card in yours is kind of a Dave card. Time stop. The first card on my list is Savanna Lions.
Which is just so, like, I want to smack you for being a noob for saying Savanna Lions. But please, explain.
Well, okay, well, I picked Savanna Lions because it was meaningful to me in my development in learning the game. Because I think everybody initially is a little bit of a Timmy Power gamer. You're like, ooh, the bigger spells appeal to you more because they're more powerful. And at some point, I realized that there was a resource curve, and stuff mostly stays on the curve. That for something that costs 1 mana, there's a normal line that goes up, and as it costs 2 mana and 3 mana and 4 mana and 5 mana and so on, it grows incrementally by the same number roughly. And the spells that tend to be the more important spells aren't the ones that are at a particular place on that line, but deviate in their place above the line. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. They're a little more powerful than like the standard 1 or 2 drop would be. Like compared to the other cards in this slot, this one is quantifiably better.
So I felt like an important point in my Magic career, if you can call it that, was when I realized that Savanna Lions was good. Because the first time you see it, you're like, so what? It's a 2-1 for 1. But when you realize that a 2-1 for 1 is just a little bit better than you normally get for 1 mana, you can win the game with just a deck full of Savanna Lions.
Maybe. I'm going to time stop you on that and play some of my other cards. Like, I get what you're saying. Like, if you're playing a deck of Savanna Lion-like cards they're all above the curve and they're all going to like progress the game more than what they cost, then yeah, I agree.
I was tending to be a little bit more provocative than that. I would say if your deck was 20 planes and 40 Savanna Lions, that's going to be a pretty darn good deck.
I would beat you.
Because turn 1 you play 1,
every
turn
single
2 you
time.
play 2 of them, turn 3 you play 3 of them. And White Weenie is a thing.
Turn 1 you play 1, turn 2 you play 2, turn 3 you play 3, and now you have no cards in hand. So yeah, like we can have a very long discussion about that.
Well, that's a good transition to your second card.
Look at that. Yes, and so that's what happens on turn 4 when Josh is playing Magic. Is my favorite card, or one of my not my favorite card. Time's not my favorite card. This card was my introduction to control and like how like it's not a game about I build my stuff and you build your stuff and that's who kills each other first. This is the first card this is an interactive card and I have to make decisions and choices that affect the game state. And that card was Wrath of God. And I say was because they don't print that card anymore. They do. Not the name of that card.
Really? I thought it's in the newest set. I gotta look.
No, the newest set is Shatter the Sky, and it's slightly different. They do not reference cards with religious names anymore. So, like, they will print a functional reprint, like a card that does exactly what Wrath of God does, but it's not called Wrath of God anymore. And all Wrath of God does was, it was 4 mana, 2 colorless and 2 white, and it's destroy all creatures.
Oh, it was reprinted in Double Masters, which is out right now. It's not in Standard, but it has been reprinted this year.
Those words, Wrath of God.
Wrath of God.
Wow. Good on them. I like that. There's a lot of religious people that don't like the fact that it references God or the fact that the Wrath of God destroys everything.
So what I remember you playing this card, and this was also before I learned this, and I'm like, wait a minute, it says destroy all creatures. That means mine too, right? Like, why would you play this in your deck if it's going to blow up your opponent's stuff and your stuff?
So I remember playing many aggro decks where an aggro deck is something where I'm going to have a lot of creatures and I'm going to beat my opponent because my creatures are either I have more of them or they are bigger than my opponent's. And I still played Wrath of God because it's always something I wanted in my hand. Like it's just a get out of jail free reset button. Like if things get out of control or start going the direction that I don't want them to go, I've got the Wrath of God. I'm going to start over.
Yeah. And because it's a symmetrical effect, it comes at a discount. Like it costs very low for how powerful of an effect it is. And because you have it as a secret from your opponent, you can play it at a time when it's more to your advantage.
Well, and yeah, that's a standard thing that happens in Magic is symmetrical effects typically are discounted. And I'm stalling for time because I know the balanced version of this, the one-sided version of this is called Plague Wind. It's a black card, and it's just destroy all of your opponent's creatures.
It costs like 9 mana or 8 mana.
It costs 9. So the same effect, except it only affects you and not me, is now more than twice the cost.
So the fact that it's symmetrical gives you a 5 mana discount.
Which is totally worth it. Wrath of God, I played that. I played that card a lot.
All right. Well, you already mentioned the second card on my list, in my signature spellbook. Did you have anything else to say about Wrath of God?
No. Go ahead.
Okay. Is Jhoira the Ghitu. Jhoira the Ghitu, so after I started playing, I kind of came in during Kamigawa block and Ravnica block, kind of the end of there. And then the first new block to me was Time Spiral block. And I don't want to fully explain what that was, but in Time Spiral block, they were tooling around with the idea of time being a resource, which was a new idea at the time, where, you could trade, instead of paying mana for a spell, you could trade time and say, I'm going to get this spell, but I'm going to get it 3 turns from now. And she was a creature that could do that with anything.
Yeah.
And she just captured my imagination. She really appealed to my Johnny combo player, and to this day I still play decks with her in it. So that's in my signature spellbook.
Yeah. So any card that has ever been existent in Magic, instead of paying some whatever ridiculous like Plague Wind, if you don't want to pay 9 mana for Plague Wind, you can pay a couple mana for Plague Wind.
2 mana for it and wait 3 turns.
There you go. And then you'll get Plague Wind. And like there's so many interesting things that happen with Jhoira because the fact that is known information. This is not something that you hide and you say, oh, this is coming. Haha, you don't know what it is. No, it's face up. Everybody knows what's going to happen. And so both players have to play around these things that are going to happen in the future, which, like you said, was a very interesting play space and made for a very interesting block.
Yeah.
Nobody else played Jhoira the Ghitu. You did, and you really liked it, and you still do. And I remember, like, when we were putting in the show notes, like, you hadn't put in any of yours yet, and I actually guessed a couple of what I thought your cards were going to be, and I put Jhoira on the list.
Yeah, good call. And in fact, my most viewed YouTube video ever is a Elder Dragon Highlander deck I made where my general was Jhoira the Ghitu, and it has like 8,000 views or something like that.
Yeah, that's not fair because you've had that video up since 1947.
Well, what's third on your list?
Ooh. Oh, hang on. Let me get this knife out of my back. Okay, pressing on. So my third card is very different because it makes my list for a reason that doesn't have really a lot to do with the game. And that is Umezawa's Jitte. It's an equipment that costs 2 that does a lot of different things. And that's what makes it very powerful, is that it has a lot of flexibility. It's never bad. It's incredibly powerful. It's still in vintage cube to this day. So like this little artifact weapon, very unassuming artwork, was incredibly powerful when it was released. It was released in Betrayers of Kamigawa, and when I got into Magic was right at the end. Like it was when the last block of that set, or the last set of that block was being released. And I'm a brand new player. I had learned how to play Magic literally the night before, like just on the internet, and I had a couple of cards I was looking at. And I went into the store and I bought a box of Betrayers of Kamigawa. And I'm opening these cards and I'm just going through them, and I have no idea what any of them are. And so I'm just sitting admiring the artwork in the store, because that's what you did back in the day. You sat there with all the other nerds, and so you could talk and socialize. And one of the cards I opened was Umezawa's Jitte. And this guy This guy saw that I had opened it, and he came over after I was done opening them all, and he's like, "Hey, you want to trade cards?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's cool.
I know who it is.
It's a collectible card game." This was a different. It's not the story you're thinking of. I was at ASBC at the time in Mississippi, so
okay.
I never saw this guy again. And we were trading cards. He's like, "Oh yeah, this little artifact equipment thing. You don't want that. Here, I'll trade you like this." At the time. Like, this is a huge creature. Like, it's going to really have a real big impact on the game. I'm like, yeah, you're right. This is going to have a huge impact on the board state.
That's dirty.
It is dirty. And so, like, looking back on that from months later, I realized Umezawa's Jitte on the secondary market at the time was like a $50 or $60 card.
Holy cow.
I know that because that was the first card that I bought online. I bought a play set of Jittes for $200. And this guy traded me a card that was worth less than $1 for it. And so this Umezawa's Jitte that I opened out of the box really introduced me to the concept that these cards have real monetary value. And I don't know if you knew this story, Ben, but at the comic book shop that we always went to play games, if there was big trades going on, a lot of times some of the regulars that were there would call me over and ask me, like, "Hey, is this legit?" Because
this was before you could just Google it and always know the current market value of stuff.
Yes, and the reason for that is I vowed, after I found out that this guy had gypped me that freaking hard, like just abusing his knowledge over mine, like as a new player. And that's just low. That's just mean-spirited. That is knowingly taking advantage of somebody. And I vowed that I would never...
That's not good for the community.
Yeah, exactly. That just makes me think less of the type of people that do this. So
why is it in your signature spellbook? Did you end up getting one and playing it a lot?
So yes, I got 4 of. I bought them. That was the first card I bought because it was incredibly powerful. And that was before they changed the legendary rule. And so the absolute best removal spell to get rid of your opponent's Jitte was to play your own Jitte because it's 2 colorless. There's no color requirement, and it destroys both of them. So, like, if I get mine on the table and it sticks, great, I'm going to win the game. If he plays one, no problem. I play mine, they're both gone. Now you have to deal with my actual deck.
And you've got 3 more in your deck, and you're probably going to draw another one.
Yeah, exactly. But, like, I made sure that nobody around me was ever gypped in a bad trade like that. And I remember, shutting down and scolding some of the senior players, like, how dare you try to pull this crap on a new player? And I would tell a new player, listen, this is garbage. This is a better trade. I'm not, I don't want to be interfering or anything, but you're getting ripped off.
That's an interesting reason for that to be in your signature spellbook, and I don't know that I have any like that, but I like that. I like that you became the champion of truth and justice because you got gypped on a Umezawa's Jitte.
So bad, Ben. I lost $49. Like, the guy stole $49 from me and made me smile about it on the way out. It makes me want to punch him in the face.
And turned you into the Robin Hood of Atomic Comics Emporium.
Or the jerk that won't let anybody get away with anything. The narc, however you want to look at it.
So number 4 on my list, fast forward a few years, Wizards of the Coast decided they want to come out with a block where they were going to experiment with gold cards. Gold cards are cards where they have more than one color on them. And there was this unassuming seeming card that came out called Knight of the Reliquary. It costs 3 mana, it's a 2/2, and it gets +1/+1 for each land in your graveyard. But it has this really interesting ability where you can tap it and sacrifice a forest or plains and then search your library for a land. Now, any spell in the history of Magic that says a land is going to be up to something.
And that's the key. That's what's going to, honestly, listeners, if you're paying attention, if you know the difference between the text search for a basic land and search for a land, veteran players get super excited when it says a land.
Yeah. So, Knight of the Reliquary was at a time when I was just learning how to expand my game, and it does something so unique. It's so versatile that it can be your win condition, it can help you ramp, it can help you answer unanswerable threats. It's just so versatile. And so this card came out at a time when I was learning how important that was and learning how to kind of tune my decks. So what you would do at the time, like for instance, there was a land that when it came into play would exile your opponent's graveyard. And so you could just have this one land either in your sideboard or in your main deck, and then Knight of the Reliquary could go get it at the right time and screw up your opponent's strategy. And on and on. It could go get a man land. It could fix your colors. It could, get you 1 extra mana that turn. If you had a Lotus Cobra out, it could get you a whole bunch of extra mana. I mean, and to this day, it's one of my favorite cards. So one of my favorite designs, and it's in my signature spellbook.
Another card that to this day exists in the Vintage Cube that's made by the manufacturer. Ben, I'm noticing that all of your cards are like pretty powerful. Very spiky cards.
Umezawa's Jitte was yours. What's next on your list?
So next on my list is it's a card. It's a land, a colorless, taps for colorless mana, but it has an activated ability. So there's it's a resource that lets you progress with the game, but you can also allows you to pay 4 mana and tap itself to create an unassuming little 1/1 creature. It's called Vitugazi the City Tree. It just makes 1 colorless mana, and it taps for 2 colorless, green and white, and it makes a little 1/1 green plant sapperling creature token.
Okay. Sounds boring and overpriced.
It is. It's never overpriced. It was like an uncommon. So they're pennies.
Oh, I don't mean it's cost to get them. I mean, like, that sounds like too much to pay for that effect.
So that effect persists to this day. Like, there is a land that is in standard that is just it taps for white, and you can tap it for 2 colorless and 2 white, and it makes a 1/1.
Make a 1/1.
And it is like that is the cost of making a 1/1 creature token. Right? Castle Ardenvale, that's right. And it is in very many like competitive standard decks. That is the appropriate cost for that effect. I'm not debating that. But that card was my introduction to value. And not value in like monetary value like Umezawa's Jitte, but value in what does having this card in my deck do for the game? And what it does is that if the game stalls or if everything goes to crap, I've used all my wraths, he's used all his wraths, we've both blown each other up so much that there's nothing left in our decks, I'm still making a 1/1 token every turn. And that, like, if you do the math on it, like, that damage stacks up very, very quickly if it goes unanswered. And land destruction is not a very common, and it's usually an overcosted effect. So whenever you get lands that can do stuff, typically they're going to stick around.
Yeah, nice. Good one. I remember playing against you and being like, what do I do about all these tokens?
So that's a whole other story in itself. I'm still mad about... At the time, I had a very competitive deck that I built in a vacuum because before I went on the internet to look at the best decks ever. And this deck was just crushing people, and it was just really good, and I kept playing it. And then I went to a big tournament, and I sat down, and I played like my third card, and the guy goes, oh, you're playing Gazi Glare. Like, what are you talking about? Oh, it's you're playing. And then he showed me, like, he pulled up on his phone. It's like, yeah, the guy that won the world championship last weekend played like almost this exact deck. I'm like, I came up with this deck by myself like 6 months ago, and now I'm the copycat? That's ridiculous.
See, I've always been confused when I hear you tell this story, because you should be flattered, not incensed.
Well,
you independently came up with the same idea that won the world championship.
Yeah, but then it drives me crazy because everybody thought I was derivative of the guy. Oh, you're just playing the world championship deck. No,
there's nothing you can do about that.
Forget you, man. I came up with this on my own. I am a unique snowflake. Don't you dare deride me down to this net decker.
All right, well, 5th on my signature spellbook is a spell called Cryptic Command. At the time when this came out, I can't remember, I think it was either in Lorwyn Block or a core set, where they basically did what's called a cycle, where they'll do something that there's an effect in each color. So there was a command card in all 5 colors, white, blue, black, red, green, but the blue one is the one that's persisted as the best of them all. And it's called Cryptic Command. It costs blue, 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 colorless. You think, boy, I better get a lot of power for that. And if you look at it, it basically says, pick 2 of these things, and then it has a list of 4 things. But it's just the perfect list of 4 things. It's counter target spell, draw a card, return target permanent to its owner's hand, or tap all creatures target opponent controls. And basically, it's an instant, and whenever you get to choose 2 of those things, and it's so versatile. And I remember just trying this card out and then loving it so much that I think I played decks with it in it the entire time it was in standard. I love it. So it's in my signature spell.
Yeah, that card specifically is another one of those value cards where because it is so versatile and because it can do so many things, like it is undercosted for the effect that it gets. Like each individual effect is not phenomenal. But the fact that you get to pick 2 from a long list means that doesn't matter what's going on in the game, it's always going to be good.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
All right, what's 5th on your list?
5th on my list is one of my favorite cards ever that I still, to this day, this card is so underrated. Wizards reprint this because I love it to death. And this land, it's a land again. It's called Gemstone Caverns. And it was incredibly unique because it referenced stuff outside of the game. Gemstone Caverns, all it is a land that taps for colorless mana. That's it. But it has this big chunk of text. If you have this card in your hand, in your opening hand at the beginning of the game, and you are playing second, like you are the guy that is not going first, you are going after the guy that goes first, you get to start the game with that card in play with a luck counter on it. And if it has a luck counter on it, it now taps for any color of mana. So
so you just ran this in every one of in every deck, huh?
I ran Gemstone Caverns one of in every deck, and I tell you what, Ben, like it was a tiny percentage of the time that it happened, but when it did, every single time, the opponent would look at me like I was a madman, and they'd have to pick up the card and like, what are you talking about? You get to start with cards in play. I'm like, this card's been around for years. Nobody plays it. I have it one of in every single one of my decks, and for like the 0.2% of the time that it comes into play, I'll tell you what. I will tell you this, Ben. Every single game where I started with that land in play with a luck counter on it, I won that game.
It's a luck counter that goes in that card for a reason, huh?
Well, it goes back to the resource and the value thing that we're talking about. One of the biggest aspects of going first is you have to skip your draw step because it's such a huge tempo advantage. Like you're the first one to play a land, you're always going to be up on resources. If you have a Gemstone Caverns that you start with in play, your opponent, his first turn has 1 mana. Your first turn, you have 2. You're already a full turn ahead of him.
Yeah, no denying it. Cool. Good choice. Next on my list is one kind of like that. It's a spell called Noble Hierarch. Noble Hierarch came out kind of in the middle of my career again, but it was one that I'd gone past the point where new cards like this would come out and I'd be like, oh, is this good or not? I looked at it and I knew it was good immediately. It has so much text on it. It falls in a very specific set of things we call mana dorks, which is a creature that you can play that then gives you more mana. But this one was versatile in that it costs 1 green, but it can make green, blue, or white mana. So it goes in so many decks, and it has an ability called Exalted. It's just really versatile, and I played it like the whole time it was available, and I still play decks within it. I love it in my Signature Spellbook.
That card, for a mana dorks are a dime a dozen. There's hundreds of them that exist in the game of Magic, and I think that card is still selling for what, $30 or $40?
Yeah, it's one of the top 3 mana dorks ever printed.
Yeah, easily. Okay, good pick. I like those colors too. You don't play those colors, but that's fine. My next card is probably the most Dave card that's on this list. And when I was sitting back thinking, like, what cards can I name off the top of my head? This is probably the 4th card that I thought of. And it's called,
this one up.
Yeah, you've got to look it up, but I know exactly what it does. It's called Hoofprints of the Stag. And this is by far my favorite. I'm going to play this card, and then I'm going to do nothing for the rest of the game. And I'm just going to smile at you as you beat your head against a wall, and I'm going to win because there's nothing you can do to stop it. And all it does is it just sits on the battlefield, and every time I draw a card, I put a counter on it. Just one little counter. And then during my turn, I can pay some trivial amount of mana and take 4 counters off it, and then I get a 4/4 flying creature. So,
okay.
And, I mean, I'm just going to keep making 4/4s. Like, I'm going to sit here. I'm going to draw a bunch of cards. They're all going to be counter spells or kill your creature cards. Like, every card I draw is going to say screw over your opponent. And then I'm going to make creatures off of them.
Okay, so this was in the stereotypical control deck. You need like a card somewhere in your deck that's your win card, and this was it. You play this on turn 2, and then you just control them the rest of the game, and this is the one that gives you the inevitability.
Exactly. Like this is the doomsday clock that you are now fighting against. When I play it on turn 2, you're going to be like, okay, whatever. But then like 10 turns later, when I've got 2 4/4 flyers and a fistful of cards that say you don't get to do what you want to do, like now you're in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if that's Dave. That feels more like Spike, man.
Oh, Spikes don't play control decks.
Sometimes they do.
Yeah. It maybe I people did not like me playing that deck. Like I played that deck long enough that people saw I would play that and then like one of the other cards, and they would just like, all right, forget it. I don't want to play with you anymore. Like there was
some Spikes only play control decks.
But this is different. My favorite kind of control deck is the control deck where you're going to lose because when time is called after an hour, we're still in game 1.
Yeah, well, Louis Scott Vargas just released a new video this week because there was a bunch of bannings and it changed the format a lot. And he's like, maybe blue-white control's viable again. And in his video, when he introduces his deck, he's like, I know it looks like this deck is thin on win conditions, but the way this deck wins is your opponent gets so frustrated they concede.
Yes, I actually watched that video that you're referencing, and those are my favorite decks. Like, your opponent's just going to be so mad they quit. Like, perfect.
Yeah. That's your win condition.
Yes. It's a psychic attack.
Well, sixth on my list is a card called Treetop Village. So I think this is the first land on my list. You have a bunch of land on yours. This is the first land on mine. Treetop Village was one that had been around for a while. So when I first started using it, I had this sense of kind of like heritage. Like it had been reprinted in one of the core sets, but it was an old card. It taps for 1 green mana, but it has this flavor idea that there's like apes hiding in the trees and you can get them to come out, and it's a forest that comes into play tap, but then it can turn into a 3/3 and hit your opponent. And the reason this card was important to me is because I realized how important manlands were. In a format where you can have Wrath of God, after a Wrath of God, Treetop Village can hit your opponent for 3. So it just the variety and the fact that your lands are also an important part of your deck. That's why this is in my signature spellbook.
That's a good one. I like that one. My 7th card is Flicker Form, and don't even look it up. It's not worth it.
It's got a lot of text on it, but yeah, good.
You looked it up beforehand. Okay. So Flicker Form.
No, I remember you playing decks with this in it, Josh.
This was my Dave coming out again. So Flicker Form came out, and it has a lot of text on it. But basically, what it says is like you put it on a creature. Like it's a magic effect that sits on a creature forever, and it gives the creature the ability to disappear from the game for a split second and then come back with everything still attached to it. And I remember saying like, this card's pretty good, and everybody booing like, boo, that's $1 rare. It's so terrible. And I went on a crusade. I held this card up. I'm like, no, I will prove that this card is good. And I made a deck around Flicker Form.
That sounds so like you. I love it.
So I made a Flicker Form deck, and I remember specifically, I was playing at a Friday Night Magic, and I played against like the most hardcore Dave that we had at the time, and he was playing his ridiculous Legendary Dragon Kakusho like reiteration deck that just like destroys you. And I had this little bulk rare that was just crushing him. Because like he's like, I'm gonna attack you with my 5/5, then I'm gonna sacrifice, I'm gonna do 15 damage to your face. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pay 4 mana, and I'm gonna make 2 guys. I'm gonna hit you for 5. I'm gonna gain 6 life. I'm going to tap that down. I'm gonna bounce this back to your hand, and then I'm just gonna gain 4 more life because I can't think of anything else to do. And like I built the deck around the concept of things like entering and leaving the battlefield constantly, and like getting all these triggers, and it was just great. And people were willing. So this was the only other card that I've ever like actively collected. Like people were like, "Oh, you want to trade cards?" I'm like, "Dude, whatever. Here's my pile of garbage." But I had a full sheet, like one of those trading card binders where I had 9 slots, and I was able to fill them. I filled the whole page with Flicker Form, and the one in the center was a foil one. And because people would trade them to me for nothing, like, and I would go through their pile like, "Ooh, Flicker Form, I want it." And I think I ended up with like 20 or 30 copies of the card because nobody wanted the stupid thing.
Do you still have them?
I don't think so. I've been in.
I want you to send me a photo of a page of Flicker Form that I can put on the Facebook.
I wish I did. And the reason I say that is because I went to a tournament in Richmond once, a big tournament, like a PTQ. And the artist, the guy who drew the art that was on Flicker Form was there. And normally I don't care. I don't care about the artist. They always have artists at these tournaments. And it's like, I'll walk by their booths, like whatever. This guy, I stood in line because I sat down. I'm like, hey, I love Flicker Form, and you made the art for Flicker Form. He's like, I don't even remember that art. And I'm like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. And there was nobody else there at the time, and I felt really bad, but I asked him. And he took all the cards out, and he laid them down in that 3x3 grid. And he, with his silver Sharpie, he redrew the Flicker Form art over all 9 cards. So that way, when I put them back in the sheet,
what?
I had this Flicker Form.
That's awesome. And you don't have it still?
I don't have it.
Ah.
I know. But that's why Flicker Form came to mind, because it was just a stupid little card that I decided to champion, and I loved it.
I don't know if you realize this, but you just told like 4 stories about Flicker Form, and you just made the best case for that card being first in your signature spellbook. Like, you championed it, you won with it, you got it autographed, and you trade for it. I mean, that like all those are reasons why this is Josh's signature spellbook. Flicker form is in it.
So if I would agree with you if flicker form was any good. Like people,
no,
like
it's exactly that it's not good, which is why.
That's why. Like people, flicker form's terrible. This is a terrible card. All the things that I did were stupid, and like flicker form is just a symptom of my insanity. But like I had fun with it and I enjoyed it. It's not my favorite card ever, but I like that card, which is why it's in my signature spellbook.
It belongs in your signature spellbook. Well, next in my signature spellbook is one called Feather the Redeemed, which is a known very good card, but which I've had great success with. In fact, it was the source probably of my greatest tournament success ever when I went deep into day 2 in Grand Prix New Jersey in 2018. So,
which that going into day 2 led to the conversation that created this podcast, people. Feather the Redeemed is the reason this exists.
All right, well then the ones we saved for 7th in our list are probably our signature spells. So Feather the Redeem costs white, red. It's a 3/4 angel, which says if you cast a spell that targets a creature you control, exile it, and then at the end of the turn it goes back to your hand. And so it can take a deck full of like pitiful, useless 1-mana spells and turn it into like this synergistic, recursive powerhouse, and that's what it does.
Well, and there is one card that it costs 1 mana and it gives a creature protection. Like it stops, like you pick a color and anything that is that color cannot affect that creature anymore for this turn. And then that coming back to your hand every turn, like people will scoop to that. It's like, oh, you have an untapped white mana source and that card in hand. Forget it. I'm done. There's nothing I can do to get around this.
Yeah. So Feather Redeemed is in my signature spellbook.
You know what drives me crazy about Feather the Redeemed is, like you said, it's an angel, and his title is The Redeemed. All I want to know, Ben, is what did Feather do to fall out of grace and then come back to redemption? And you can't tell me that.
This is a gap that the Bad and Magic podcast can fill in the universe. We need to give Feather the Redeemed some backstory. You know, it sounds like one of those funny internet stories. It's like, and then I woke up and I was holding a Klondike bar.
Well, no, I think that story exists. I just don't think you can tell me what it is. That's what drives me nuts.
No. But these are the kind of games I play at the dinner table with my children. Who cares what the real story is? We need to come up with the Bad at Magic podcast reason for what Feather the Redeemed did.
What did Feather do as an angel to fall from grace, and how did he then redeem himself? There's 2 stories there.
Yes.
So great. So epic. Okay.
All right, what's the last on your list?
The last on my list, and the reason it made this list is because I have it here in my hand. Like, I don't play Paper Magic anymore, but this card I have because I have to say it's my favorite art. The only reason I like this card at all, in any way, shape, or form, is because I love the art on this card. This card is Silvermere.
That's your inner Vorthos.
That's what it is. Well, and I like flavor text, and I like the stories, Ben. I like the stories, and that's the Vorthos. But this is Silvermere. It costs 2 colorless mana. It's a little 1/1 creature, and he taps for blue mana. And he's a little robot guy. He's an Artifact creature. He's a Myr, M-Y-R. And that's a whole creature type that existed at a certain time in Magic. And the only reason I like Myr as a creature type is because the art on this card. Like, and this is the original printing. Like, if you look this up, there's 2 printings. There's a later one that's garbage. It's the earliest, the original.
Oh, it's terrible.
It is terrible. The original art is fantastic. And I look at it and I just think, like, this artist went into such detail. Like, he's got little kneecaps, and I find myself looking at him like, how would a robot's kneecaps work? And this really cool, like, beaky kind of shape to his head. And I don't know, just something about this poor little robot sitting in the rain looking like somewhat like he looks like he's either sad, tired, or plotting. And I like to think he's plotting something sinister in this rainstorm that he's sitting in.
It doesn't even have any facial features. There's no eyes or nose or anything, but you're right. It's almost like it's portraying emotion.
Yeah.
And it's ambiguous enough that you could project any of those things onto it.
That's probably, I'm projecting my own, like, you think I'm sitting here just doing my job, but I'm hatching sinister plots. Like, that's me projecting onto this poor little robot.
To me, I look at it and I think he looks mournful. Like, the world has become barren and he wishes it weren't.
You see, I see him taking a rest between dire, sinister operations. Like in this stormy...
That's good art. Good job, Kev Walker.
Exactly. So that's why Silvermere makes my list. And I don't play Paper Magic, and I have a physical copy of this card that sits in my office because I like looking at it.
Have you ever met Kev Walker at an event?
I've never searched for Kev Walker at an event, but I have asked vendors, and they look at me like I'm a psychopath because this is a common from a set that came out in 2004. And I say, hey, do you have any foil original art Silvermere? And they look at me like, what are you even talking about? Like they deal with hyper nerds all day, and I'm the guy that gets the weird looks.
All right. Well, my 8th card on my signature spellbook is a Dave card, I'm going to say. So recently, as I've started to expand into older formats, when you get a modern deck or a legacy deck, you really have to commit because it's expensive. And they can be worth $1,000 or more to get one of these decks. And when I finally decided what I wanted to commit to, I committed to a deck called Ponza, which is the name for just a basic strategy. We're trying to accelerate for as fast as possible to 4 mana and then do something powerful for 4 mana that puts your opponent at an extreme disadvantage. And one of the things you can do for 3 mana that puts the opponent at an extreme disadvantage is an enchantment called Blood Moon. Blood Moon sits on the battlefield and says, non-basic lands are mountains. Just like Time Stop, it's very simple text that has a lot of implications.
Yes. It's like, oh, did you spend $3,000 on fancy lands for your super awesome deck? Well, guess what?
Now they're all mountains.
They are all 10-cent commons. Good job.
Yeah. So I like playing Ponza because you can get out an early Blood Moon, and then your opponent has to either have an answer to it or play an honest game of Magic. And that's in my signature spellbook.
Nice. So I really liked this signature spellbook thing that we did, and I'm gonna tell you now. This is on my list of things to build in my garage. Is I want to build a frame for my signature spellbook.
Okay, well, you look at this and you think of a wood carving project, and I look of it and think I need to make some graphics. So I'll do up some graphics of you and me and our signature spellbooks, and you can start the frame.
Fun. I really enjoyed this little exercise of sharing stories about random nonsensical things that don't actually pertain to our life as adult men and parents, but that we spend so much time and emotion on.
Yeah, and some good reminiscing down memory lane. Well, I'd like to transition to Bad at English. We normally do it earlier in the podcast, but this time I wanted to do it a little bit cheeky and talk about some of the British words for articles of clothing. So as I started doing this, I went through my list and realized that there's lots of different words that we use that are ambiguous because the British also use them, but they have a completely different meaning. The obvious one is pants.
Pants. Okay.
When we say pants, we mean things that cover up your legs and go down to your ankle, from your waist to your ankles. But the British do not mean that. When they mean that thing, they call it trousers.
Okay.
Trousers very specifically means what we call pants. Very unambiguously, if a British person says pants, they mean underwear.
just flat. There is absolutely no ambiguity to it whatsoever. Just pants are underpants.
Pants means underpants. And if you ever call it that, they'll laugh or mock you or whatever. And they even use it the way we would use underwear, like they use it as an adjective. Like they'd say, "Well, that's a bit pants," which means that sucks.
That's interesting because the British way of doing that, like changing those two words, does save them one syllable between both words. Slightly more efficient.
Yeah. So what we might call tidy whities, I once heard a British person call budgie smugglers, which I thought was fun.
That has to be a tongue-in-cheek reference, like we would say banana hammock. There is absolutely no way people just call them budgie smugglers as the common dictate.
Actually, if you Google budgie smugglers, then it's a lot safer than Googling banana hammock. It comes up with a swimwear company and they sell Speedos, but it's the same kind of idea. Just tight underwear. Yeah.
I'm contesting that. That's got an asterisk on it. There's no way that is in common use in England. But please, continue.
All right. Well, other kind of common slang is what would you say the American word is for like women's underwear that's very much for function and not for form? That's like gives good coverage and maybe controls a little bit. Maybe is flesh colored.
It's talking high-waisted, like just white, like the female equivalent of budgie smugglers is what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, well,
that's exactly where I was going.
Those are granny panties.
Right, granny panties is what we call them. So I brought this up once. I don't know how it came up in a conversation, but there was a notorious scene in a film that was crossed the pond, Bridget Jones' Diary, which was based on a popular British novel, and the main character, Bridget Jones, gets in this dilemma where she's about to get lucky, and she realizes that she's wearing her granny panties, and so it became notorious. And in the UK, they started calling them that, and they shorten it as always. So if they want to talk about granny panties, they call them your Bridgets.
What? Oh, what?
Yeah.
Oh, apologies to anybody in the country named Bridget.
Well, I would change here, but you'd better turn your back. I've got my Bridgets on.
That I don't even want to know how and when that scenario would take place.
Yeah. Well, they also, before Bridget Jones' Diary is popular, they would call them apple catchers. And I Googled this. I'll put the image in the library. It's funny.
Don't
just
Google
imagine like an old lady
catchers.
like filling her underwear with apples.
You see, that's why don't Google that. Like when you're calling any kind of underpants apple catchers, that's an elaborate story that I just don't want to know.
But okay, yeah, I'll put a graphic on the Facebook with the usual album of the episode. You can take a look at that.
Okay.
Now, one I heard come up in a conversation that I kind of raised my eyebrow at was vest. I think they sometimes use the word vest like we do, where you think of like the under a jacket and a 3-piece suit.
Yeah.
But they use the word vest to mean what we would call a tank top. But the context I heard this come up in was they were talking about a trashy person sitting on their front lawn drinking vodka at 10 in the morning. And they said he was sitting out there in a string vest, drinking vodka, sitting on a piss-stained mattress. Like, imagine like the trashiest thing you can think of. That's what they're trying to describe. But string vest is the word we would call wife beater.
Okay, like, so a person sitting on like a soiled mattress drinking vodka in a wife beater in like whatever time of day, yeah, that's pretty trashy. Now, however, you replace that mental image with somebody even bare-chested wearing like a tweed vest or something, like what we call a vest, and that makes it much classier. It's like, oh, that's a gentleman down on his luck.
That's right. But yeah, what we call a wife beater, they call a vest, and they mean tank top. And one last one, just for good measure, that also would throw me for a loop whenever they would do it. The word boots. When we use the word boots, we exclusively mean footwear that exceeds the top of your ankle.
Yeah, like
there's a wide variety of things that fit into that category, but generally it has, in order to be called boots, it has to exceed the top of your ankle. But the British have no such restriction. Most specifically, I heard this in the context of shoes that have a work task. Like soccer players wear football boots, they would call them. I need to go out to the pitch for the football, but I forgot my boots. And I'm like, boots? Why? What do you need boots to play soccer for?
So, a lot of times when you do bad at English, I'm genuinely interested or mildly entertained by all the things that you're bringing up. The shoes versus boots, I'm very, very Ron Swanson about this. Like, oh, we don't have that in America. Like, just... Like, okay, Britain.
And then crunch on some bacon.
Yeah, way to get it wrong. They're shoes. Good job.
Yeah, no, they're just wrong about that one. and while I'm saying football versus soccer, they're the ones that stuck us with that word. But we'll talk about that in another
Really,
time.
They came up with soccer and just made us say it to make us sound stupid behind their backs.
And then switch back.
And then they switch back. That sounds like a British prank that they would do. It's like, we said something was something else, and then switched back when the Yanks weren't looking.
So, again, talking about the order in which we do stuff in the show, we normally do Bad at Parenting way earlier, but I'd like to do a little bit of Bad at Parenting now. But it looks like we're getting on in length of this episode, and this is kind of a lengthy story, so I might save it.
Ooh, well, we have to have something for Bad at Parenting, right?
Yeah, do you got something?
Do I have something for Bad at Parenting? I'm a bad parent. Does that count for Bad at Parenting? Like, okay, how about So today's Saturday, and like I was playing video games with my family all day, which was super fun. But then okay, here we go. Has this ever happened to you as a parent where you're hanging out with your family and then you're like, oh, I need to go to the restroom, I need to get a drink, whatever. And you walk out of the room and then you're just like cruising through your phone for a second and you find like an interesting video or like an interesting post or an article or something. Like I came across a Magic the Gathering video that was like 40 minutes long. And before I know it, I'm laying in my bed with the covers over me. Just like, it starts slowly. You're watching it and like, oh, I should sit down. And you sit down.
I'm just getting up to go to the bathroom.
And then I'm going to put my feet up. And I'm going to kick my shoes off. Then I'm going to lay down on the pillow. And then it's a little chilly, so I'm going to put the blanket over me. And so then my wife walks in and is like, what are you doing? I'm like, and then I pause and you realize,
I'm going to the bathroom.
I'm laying in the bed by myself watching a YouTube video, avoiding my family because I just wanted to watch a video in peace. Like, and I feel bad when she catches me doing that, and like she catches me in that position like way too often. But like, does that make me a bad parent, Ben?
That's a good example of bad parenting. I think we all do that. There's this classic scene from Malcolm in the Middle, which you and I talk about sometimes, where the dad, I forget the character's name.
Al.
She's like, honey, could you change the light bulb? Al, could you change the light bulb?
We make this joke in our house all the time. I know exactly the scene that you're talking about.
So anyway, one thing leads to another, and 5 minutes later, he's like under the car in the garage, and she comes out there and she's like, I thought I told you to change a light bulb. And he goes, what does it look like I'm doing?
So poor Hal, the light goes out, and he's like trying to flick the switch, and he goes into the cabinet to like grab a new light bulb, but the cabinet's a little squeaky, so he goes into the pantry to get the WD-40. But then, like, the drawer kind of fell off its hinges, so then he goes out to the garage to get, like, a screwdriver, but the screwdriver, something's wrong with that, and then he, like, tries to start the car to go get a screwdriver, and it's not running quite right, and then he's got the engine lifted, and she's like, hey, you gonna fix the light bulb? Yeah, no, we say that exact joke, like, so much. Like, because
me too.
As a parent, that happens, right?
What does it look like I'm doing?
Yeah, you start one task, which then leads to another task. Like, okay, I've got to pause this and start doing this, which leads to yet another thing. And you're 4 layers
Suddenly
deep.
I'm laying in bed watching a 40-minute long Magic the Gathering video.
We say that when we're doing, like, actual chores and stuff. But I'm going to start doing that. It's like, hey, aren't you going to come up and make dinner? It's like, what does it look like I'm doing? Laying in the bed with my shoes off watching a YouTube video.
Oh, Nicole has something for you. You got to let her in.
Let her into what?
Into the room you're in.
Oh, stand by. SOB, mother trucking.
All right,
unbelievable.
So we're running out of time here, but because this is the 26th episode of Bad at Magic, a year ago you and I started this podcast thing, and I was trying to think what could I do to commemorate the occasion. So you have a box there. Go ahead and open it up.
That is unbelievable. Yes. So Ben interrupts the podcast like, hey, you need to let your wife in the room. What is he talking about? She has the code to this room. She could punch it in. Maybe she's trying to be polite and just not make any noise that's going to get recorded on the podcast. I go to the door and I open it, and she's handing me a box. Like, why is she handing me a box? And it's addressed to Nicole Fleshman. Why is this addressed to Nicole Fleshman? Why is it so important she has to give it to me right now? And then I open it, and there's a Nike shoe box. Like, why is she handing me shoes? She just keeps these in the normal house. And then, like, I realized there is no way her feet are this big. And like, it took a second for me to connect the dots. Like, did she buy me shoes? Like, are these in the mail? Like, wait a minute. No, these have to be Nike Air Jordans,
Air Max 95.
Air Max 95 in the classic gray on lime green Bad at Magic colors. And like, I'm so mad at you. We said we weren't going to get gifts, you jerk.
No. Okay, so I picked those up a long time ago when they came out. They're not the OG green. They're a special edition called Winter Utility, and they have some eccentricities to them, we'll say, that probably is a reason I was able to get them at a bit of a discount. So if you look at the bottom, instead of the regular waffle pattern, they have like this deep grooves in them. I guess it's supposed to be better for traction in the winter. Really, all they do is they pick up little tiny rocks. So my apologies for that. If you look in the...
Go ahead. Yeah.
If you look in the back and the front, they also have a higher percentage of reflective material. Again, they were just going with this theme. So with this model, the Air Max 95, they've released dozens and dozens of different colorways, and this was one of the most recent ones where they were trying to do something interesting and new. So they took a color pattern, they used kind of like reflective materials more and materials that shed water and put better traction on the bottom, and some of it was hit and some of it was missed. Here's the thing, you're gonna miss this if you aren't looking real close. Okay. When I got my pair and I wore them for about 2 months, I realized there was a design flaw. They thought they'd get real fancy, and they swapped out the regular soft shoelaces for these that are made out of like parachute cord.
Okay.
But what they didn't realize is that the parachute cord had a higher strength than the retention loops, and they would saw through.
Okay, well, this is only a problem if you're a type of person that actually like pulls your shoelaces and ties them every time. Ben, I haven't tied any of my shoes for at least a year.
All right. Well, then I solved a problem that didn't need to be solved, but here's what happened. So in order to keep mine from like falling apart, I had my wife do a modification of them where she strengthened the top loop on both sides. So you have a custom pair where Alicia has modified the top loop on both shoes so that the laces won't saw through the loops. And she did it so unobtrusively you can't even tell. Like, look real close.
I'm looking for it. Like, there's no words. Should have sent a poet. Like, just damn you, man. Like, okay, so for lots of reasons. First of all, like, this is cool. Like, first of all, it's just a cool thing to have, especially on the 1 year anniversary of the podcast. And two, like, I am so bad about shoes. Like, shoes are the last thing that I care about ever. Like, for example, the shoes that I am wearing this minute, the way that I work shoes is I have running shoes that I pay good money for, and then when they get to the point where they are physically hurting me, they get retired to normal everyday shoe status. And so the shoes that I am wearing on my feet are so old that there are giant holes. I don't know if you can see that in the video, but there are enormous holes on multiple sides. Yeah, like I legitimately need like new shoes. Like there's no tread left on them. They're falling to pieces. So you sent this over to me.
Well,
it's just
I hope they fit.
I'm gonna wear them like every day. So if they don't, whatever. All right. So I have not gotten you anything for our stupid Bad at Magic podcast.
Yes, you did.
I am going to make you one of those frames, and the reason I didn't want to bring it up, so for our signature spell books, I am gonna make you one of those big fancy frames with the matting and everything, so you can get your signature spellbook cards and hang them up proudly in whatever nerd place that you have reserved.
That sounds like fun. That sounds like, okay, which art version of this card do I want? I want them all foil? Do I want white border? What?
Just so many nerd decisions that you get to make, and then go to hunt them down and all that.
That's going to be great.
Now, the problem is I didn't want to bring it up because I'm really bad at deadlines. For example, your birthday gift I made for Christmas presents this year.
Which is 6 months later.
Yeah.
So I got you those shoes a long time ago. My wife modified them so that they won't fall apart. I hope you like them. They're in the covers of the podcast so that when you look at them, you can think of the Bad at Magic logo. And
Ben, I love them so much. I'm having a hard time not swearing because I swear a lot and I don't swear on the podcast, and I want to swear so bad just to express my vehement emotional state right now.
And I don't regularly make a habit of texting your wife without telling you, so that was what I was up to.
I try not to text your wife without your knowledge either, so these are good boundaries to have and talk about.
All right, so also, since it's been a year of the podcast, I just want to talk about where we're at. So I remember when I pitched the idea to you a year ago, I'm like, hey, man, we had this experience a year ago where there was this lady listening to us in the airport, and she stopped us and was like, hey, you guys, I like listening to you talk. That was really interesting. And that planted the seed in my brain that led to us doing this podcast. And I didn't really have much idea beyond that. Like, what is it going to be? How long is it going to last? How frequently are you going to do it? And just in the course of you and I having this discussion, we kind of hashed it out that we wanted it to be something we did regularly, but not take over our life. And I think it kind of filled, in a weird kind of way, it filled a niche in my life, like a hole I had, and I've really enjoyed it. Like, I like you as a friend. I enjoy these discussions that we have. This has given me a creative outlet. It's given me something to do that I'm interested in, that I get excited about, and I hope a year from now we're still doing it.
I'm honestly really, really glad that you feel that way. Like, you're a great friend. You're probably the best friend that I have. And it is great to talk to you. And I'm such an introverted person that I don't talk to my friends enough. Like, I go years between sending emails to people that I should be talking to more frequently. And so I am genuinely pleased that I get to talk to you on a regular basis in a structured environment where, like, I don't have to get off of my lazy carcass and go actually, like, call you out of the blue, because only weirdos call people out of the blue, Ben. So, but we have this regular vehicle where I can get to interact with you in a way that, and it's nice, and I'll be able to text you about ideas, and so it's been really great for our friendship. And then I've always felt like you took it way more seriously than I do. Like, now, to be fair, I take it seriously, but I don't take it nearly as seriously. You're very driven about this whole thing, and I came into it with, like, you know what? We have good conversations. I like talking to you, and if it's a little extra work to record everything and get it out there for whoever. Like, honestly, if we get 0 listeners, if nobody downloads this podcast, I think I'd still like to record it and do it with you, just for no other reason than posterity. I get to talk to my best friend. Whatever. We'll just keep doing it.
I think that's why it doesn't feel like there's no pressure to attain anything. I've had a few goals. I've had some listener goals I'd like to reach. And stuff like that, but it feels like you said, if we don't, it's okay. But I think that's also what makes it easygoing and worthwhile, and why people like to listen, because we're not out to try to support our lives on this or anything. We're just a couple of guys living our lives, and maybe other people are interested in the kind of stuff we want to talk about.
And that's the internal vision. That's our drive for doing this podcast. Now, from the outside, I have gotten feedback recently where people have told me the podcast sounds a lot better. Like, I had a listener that told me that they went back and listened to episode 1 and then re-listened to, like, the latest episode that was released. And, like, you guys have gotten a lot better at this since you've been going. And that's good feedback from the outside. And yeah, we do take it seriously. I don't know if anybody knows this, but if you listen to, like, the first handful of episodes, like, my sound quality is garbage because I had a $5 Amazon microphone and I was recording in a very echoey room. I have since, like, my family bought me
I love it.
My family bought me a super nice microphone, and I modified. Like, I made physical, permanent modifications to the room that I am sitting in order to support giant quilted blankets that completely surround me in this pillow fort. And I shut down the air conditioning, and right now, Ben, it has to be 85 degrees in here, and I am physically sweating. And so, like, we do put effort into this podcast. If you think we sit down and just BS for a while, that is true. But I'm also very uncomfortable.
I think sometimes people get a sense that it's a bit of a commitment, because every 2 weeks we get together and we do this recording. But I've had people ask me, so, like, how long does it actually take to produce it? And what's the division of labor? I'm like, well, it happened kind of naturally. And it's funny, you feel like I do more, and I feel like you do more. But we both contribute. We each record a separate audio file, and then we get into Audacity and edit out noises and level and make the audio quality good so that we're producing a high quality product that's easy on the ears. We bought microphones to do, but I'd say for probably about every hour of podcast content, I probably spend about 3 hours planning, producing, editing, all that kind of stuff.
Then you're definitely doing more work than me. I'm probably more at, like, the 2-hour level. For hour of recording, probably 2 hours worth of work on my side.
Now, once I finish editing the audio file and send it to you, then what happens? What do you do with it?
Oh, the publishing process, I've gotten down to a science. Like, I just have to get the file uploaded to a specific place on the server, and then I did put a lot of front-loaded work. So I did have to spend a significant amount of time setting all of these systems up. But now that they're up and running, it's a fairly quick process to say, hey, server, website, this is the latest podcast episode. Here are the show notes. Yea, verily. Deliver it to all of our faithful 8 listeners.
Nice. And, in the modern times, that automatically gets it on iTunes and Google Podcast Store and all those kinds of places. So I guess that's pretty nice. So I do the audio editing. I tend to write the outlines for the show, and then you do the web publishing and the distribution of the audio file.
Basically, I think that's where it boils down to. And like we both said, we're doing this for fun, and we will do this for posterity, probably just to keep up with each other forever. That said, if you're listening to our voices right now and you are genuinely entertained by the things that we talk about, recommend us to a friend. I feel like that's a very low-level thing. Like, hey, I got a podcast list. You just shoot it out there. If you tell 2 people and they tell 2 people, and then next thing you know, the whole planet listens to Bad at Magic Podcast.
That's right. We'll be like Bill and Ted. There will be peace and harmony in the universe.
Be
because of wild stallions.
Excellent to each other.
All right, man. Well, congratulations on a year of podcasting. I hope a year from now we're still doing it. And my goal for the next year is I'd like to see our listener base double again.
My goal for this coming year would be to actually record the 2nd annual anniversary episode in Vegas, where it all started, and actually playing some paper magic again. The world is...
That would be
awesome. The world's gone a little topsy-turvy, but if we can get back to our roots, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'd like that too. All right, well, thanks to our listeners. Thanks for being here. Thanks for supporting us. If you've made it this far, listen to all 26 episodes. Great. Thanks for coming along. If you want, you can go to badatmagic.live and hear the whole back catalog, read some articles Josh published. There's links to our YouTube channel, and you can see some magic videos we made. I have some new content I'm working on for the YouTube channel that I want to advertise right now, and that is there's a genre I like that's like a video essay, where basically somebody writes an essay and then there's video content that goes along with it to kind of enhance the essay. And I've written one about the Air Max 95 because this year is the 25th anniversary of the Nike Air Max 95. I've written a video essay for the Air Max 95. I'll put a link in the show notes. If you like it, great. I'm going to try to advertise it amongst shoeheads community because that's more of who it's to, but it's also, listeners of the Bad Magic podcast can relate.
I'll tell you what, you never know what you're going to get when you listen to an episode of Bad Magic.
And if you like it a whole lot and you want to show some more support, you can go to our Patreon and support us there at patreon.com/badatmagic.
It's been a great 1 year with you, Ben. Here's to many
Thanks,
more.
Josh.